Story 1. I once sat at dinner with a 60-ish woman who spent 2 hours of nonstop verbal complaining about everything that is wrong with the world and how people deserve to die because they're just animals. Then she complained that her daughter wasn't giving her grandchildren because her daughter had such a negative view of the world and didn't want to bring kids into it. I was speechless. Classic. Story 2. They just never apologize for anything. It will always end up being someone else's fault, or someone else misunderstood what they were saying. Even if they can't blame it away, they will give the obligatory, "I'm sorry you got mad about that." That's not a real apology, Michelle. Own your mistakes, learn from them, and move on. Story 3. Inconveniencing others and not realizing it, like stopping in the middle of a sidewalk to check your phone, or parking your shopping cart on one side of the aisle and looking at something on the other side so you block the entire aisle. Story 4. When they are unable to point out their own shortcomings and lack of knowledge. Admitting that does not make someone stupid. It is actually incredibly respectable and shows that you are not only aware of your limits but are admitting that you still have lots to learn. Another sign is hypocrisy and holding a double standard where it is convenient for them. Story 5. They very obviously interject and start talking when someone wasn't finished, or when it's clear that they weren't paying attention and were just waiting for their turn to speak. Story 6. When you're eating your lunch at your desk and they come into your office, sit down and start talking. When they go from office to office telling literally everyone the same story about something that has nothing to do with work. By the time they make it to my office, I've already heard it at least 3 times and am not afraid to tell them so. When they are in your office and their cell phone rings and they pick it up and start having a full conversation with whomever is on the other end instead of leaving. Yes, the same person at my work did all 3 of these things, and their feelings got hurt when the phone call incident happened because I pointed at my open door and they said, "What?" And I said, "Leave my office. I don't want to listen to you talk on the phone." They didn't talk to me for over a week. That week was so peaceful. Story 7. Those people who must one-up your every story. I had a friend who would do this. I finally walked away when I mentioned my ex-wife, whom I hadn't seen in about 20 years, died, and he told me how his high school girlfriend died in a car crash right in front of him. I wasn't looking for a competition. Story 8. Being really loud. I know some people can't help it and that's just the way they are. But not everyone wants to hear you yelling and hollering every single part of your conversation for 2 hours. People who pee and leave hair all over the toilet seat. People who constantly interrupt and talk over you and then ask why you are upset or not talking. Story 9. When someone constantly complains about being misunderstood or attacked, it is often a sign that they struggle to see beyond their own perspective. This usually stems from a lack of understanding beyond their own experiences or independence. Story 10. It's shocking that some people still don't get the concept of what is subjective versus objective, and they confuse both as the same thing, believing whatever idea that pops into their mind as universal truth that applies to everyone and everything. I mean, it's not the same as not admitting one's mistakes and limitations, which is a pride and ego thing. I am talking about a literal inability to comprehend the immaterial notion of subjectivity and how it is the complementary antithesis to another completely distinct abstract yet objective form, the material world. My aunt is 70 years old and she is always correct, absolutely perfect human. And even though this is clearly not possible in the real world but only in her head, her ideas are only in her mind. She thinks they are also outside of her, existing in the same way as the food she eats and clothes she wears. And when I tell her that her opinions are not automatically true, she proceeds to explain why her opinion is true and can't ever be wrong, because it is her opinion and is not wrong. She does not understand how her opinion is any different from the steam being produced when water reaches its boiling point. There is no method of ever explaining to her otherwise. It's like making a blind man see the ocean. It's amazing actually how people with an actual defective brain are even taken seriously and can have influence and power over us. These kinds of people are everywhere and possibly are your loved ones, coworkers, bosses, the guy serving your food, the school bus driver, the person next to you, the love of your life. And these people can't mentally process a fundamental aspect of reality, a literal mental disability. Story 11. There was a girl in my undergraduate program who was genuinely one of the most insufferable human beings I have ever dealt with. She was loud, very opinionated, would say inappropriate things constantly, and everyone complained about her all the time to her face and to our professors. She would always play the victim. You guys need to be nicer to me. I don't know why you guys don't want to be my friend. I feel like everyone hates me. And not to mention, she was also really bad at her job. She's good at studying and retaining information, but her lack of self-awareness and accountability is going to be a problem for sure. If you have no friends or cannot keep your friends, maybe it is time to look in the mirror. There is no shame in it. It is okay to realize you are the reason you have no friends. You just have to accept it and go from there. You have to really think about other people and their needs, and not just what you want. It drives me bonkers when people play victims like that. Also, if you make zero attempts to initiate friendships with people, I don't want to hear that nobody wants to be your friend. As an extreme introvert, this is something I really had to come to terms with. Social interaction and friendships are a personal responsibility that you have to put effort into. If the other person isn't giving, move on. Thanks for coming to my technology, entertainment, and design talk. Story 12. Slowing down once they turn into a parking lot or not accelerating with traffic on a freeway. Also, the folks who stop just past the entrance to the grocery store to adjust their purse or wallet or just stand there, forcing a bottleneck behind them. Story 13. Goes into temper tantrum mode when you disagree with them. No one is going to agree 100% with everyone on everything. We all come from different walks of life. Story 14. I just watched an episode of I Am a Killer. This woman choked a man while her accomplices beat him up. He survived with severe brain damage and constant seizures. He eventually died after a particularly severe seizure 6 years later. This crazy woman doesn't believe she is responsible for his death. She says that he lived for 6 whole years and that she shouldn't have his murder over her head. My jaw dropped at the absolute delusion she had. Story 15. You know those people who obviously like to lie for fun, but they almost seem to convince themselves of their own lies? And you can usually see that smug look in their eyes when they assume that you believe them? Those people are too self-centered to be self-aware. Story 16. People who think their opinions matter more than someone else's feelings. They claim to be an honest person, and it's not their fault people don't like them. So annoying. Story 17. When they accuse others of doing things to them that they actively do to others with no irony. Seriously, one sibling was infuriated by a roommate's selfishness, and the rest of the siblings and I were rolling with laughter because everything they listed as an egregious offense they had done to us for years. Karma. Baby. Story 18. When they are an arrogant, know-it-all, mansplaining person. A very long-time friend has been married to a man like this for decades. The older he gets, the worse he is. She continually makes excuses for him and translates his superior comments into kinder and less judgmental conversation. Over the years, she has ended friendships with anyone who has mentioned this. I do not spend time with him. Too painful. Story 19. When they are able to make any moment about them and completely take the focus away from the room. Example. A former colleague who, when we were planning an office potluck to celebrate a team achievement, asked if everyone could make extra portions so she could bring some home for leftovers. She then began to list her dietary preferences and likes and dislikes. I have never seen a group of smiling faces lose every bit of collective excitement so quickly. Story 20. Finding themselves in a rut and then becoming bitter and impassioned by their bitterness to make everyone as miserable as they are. Seen it even with people who had good interpersonal skills flicker from bright to dark really fast whenever things do not go their way. Story 21. Binge drinking alcohol or using drugs until intoxicated or addicted. Not only lacking self-awareness but also ignorance of disease, self-care, self-respect, self-destruction, and loss of empathy for loved ones who suffer because of this struggle too. Story 22. I got a drive the other day from someone who was an absolutely horrible driver. Like really bad. During the drive, they told me, "It's unbelievable how bad some people are at driving," while talking about other drivers on the road. That, to me, is bad self-awareness. Story 23. Every single bad thing that happens to them is always someone else's fault. It's like they are literally unable to find a positive side to any situation. Story 24. That blank look goes deeper into, not much, just going through the world on their own and not even registering anything else. No worries, no fear, not much else, just the very top layer of life. Scary. Story 25. Stopping dead in doorways when there are people behind them. Eating excessively on food that is supposed to be shared. Puts feet on air conditioner vents in the car so their feet get cool but the rest of the car smells. Story 26. A law rigid extreme. They play life like a board game with a little pamphlet rulebook that is ultimately arbitrary because everyone's is different. They do this because an inability to reflect means an inability to refine. Story 27. They smell bad. If a person smells bad, there's a big chance he has a negligible amount of self-awareness. Any person wouldn't voluntarily go out in public smelling bad, or even at home for that matter, so if they stink, then that's a big sign, at least for me. Story 28. A major sign that someone lacks self-awareness is consistently blaming others for their problems while never acknowledging their own role in conflicts or failures. Story 29. Listening to live Trump Japanese Prime Minister news conference. Donald has zero self-awareness. Every question is answered by how great he is. He has no idea what a fool he makes out of himself. Story 30. Growing up with a narcissist for a mother, I learned to read faces at a very young age. Then there is the body stiffness. I see and feel it at the same time. Shuts me down completely. Story 31. When they talk over you or have no spatial awareness, and when they're out and talk super loud to the point that the section you're in can practically hear your conversation. Story 32. When they don't know or understand when and how to be polite, especially being unable to say thank you when someone does something considerate for them. Story 33. They make their issues your issues. Whether it be sounds, violence, or something as mundane as eating strong-smelling food, they do things that affect the people around them. Go ride public transportation and you'll see it. Story 34. Nobody knows this, but everyone thinks that everyone is stupid because this kind of people will look at their own problems and think they are caused by literally every other person in the world not going along with them. Story 35. I knew someone who would tell stories about how victimized they were, but if you dig not even that deep honestly, you'd find them to be the actual villain in that story. Anyone calling them out on their nonsense was a big meanie, and anyone who cut off contact with them for good reasons abandoned them. They would be mad at someone for being mad at them, knowing they screwed the other person over. Someone being mad at them was the real crime to them. Story 36. Trying to dictate your feelings, especially when paired with a lack of communication or never asking how you feel, and making everything about previous relationship failures. Story 37. Bro, I don't know exactly a sign, but I'll share an experience. My friend is obsessed with anime. I don't think it's wrong to enjoy anime, but she has started to turn it into a fetish. She will randomly start speaking in Japanese and makes those anime shriek sounds every time she's spooked. Every time she laughs, she puts her hand in front of her mouth, laughing like those cosplayers do. At this point, she doesn't even do it deliberately. It's just natural for her. Again, I wouldn't have a problem with all that because to each their own, but I'm a traditional artist who loves to draw realism. She has on multiple occasions told me how I'm talentless and she'd kill herself if she had to ever draw realism. She draws overly sexualized anime characters. Her justification is that she has no self-awareness. Story 38. Tendency to blame others for your difficulties. I think the person who mostly uses defense mechanisms is me. I do projection a lot. Which one do you guys use the most? Story 39. I am definitely like this. I am often told to listen or pay attention, but I space out so easily and cannot pick up on the social aspects of when somebody is finishing their sentence. Story 40. There's a difference between no self-awareness, and then there's too much self-awareness to the point where someone self-doubts himself, ironically leading to what people classify as no self-awareness. In short, stop judging. People are different, and we aren't machines, as much as society wishes you to be. There are people who are apathetic and have apathy because people will judge you and claim you have no self-awareness regardless of what you do or didn't do. Life is already tiring as is, on top of being mundane and utterly will-breaking. To whoever unironically thinks someone has no self-awareness, stop adding to the statistics. Story 41. Current example. We are on a 6-hour bus ride at the moment, and there is a guy well into adulthood who has continuously been picking his nose, as in fully digging for gold or something. It might be a minor example, but I would say he lacks self-awareness. Story 42. When a group of people talk super loud in a place that should be quiet, such as a library, or when people talk loudly on the phone in a place that should be quiet, like a library. Story 43. They are in a crowd or airplane and flip their long hair behind them. This has happened to me many times, but the worst offender was my seatmate on a transatlantic flight who did it repeatedly like a tick.